So we have our first speaker for here this morning, and so Peter Scocimara, and he works at Google, in the Google for Work sector. And it's been a pleasure working and collaborating with Scotch, and I was thinking about it. It might have something to do with the fact that he's been on both sides of things. He's worked in startups, he's been a founder and a CEO and a COO, and he's also now working in a larger enterprise, Google. And so he's seen how collaboration software can impact teams when they're small and when they're big, and of all of the clients that he works with to help them empower and ignite a culture of collaboration. And so a couple of things about Scotch, too, you should know. He is a two-time runner-up of the Darwin Awards. Anybody familiar with what that means? Yeah, he broke his neck twice. So we're glad that he's here with us today. And his role at Google now is Senior Director of Global Support at Google for Work. So please welcome to the stage, Scotch.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you, Vanessa, and thank you all for coming today. I am very happy to be here, not just because I broke my neck twice, but because I'm very passionate about culture, and I'm very passionate about the benefits of collaboration, both on culture, but also on business results. I suspect many of you in the room are passionate also about culture. You wouldn't come all the way to San Francisco and attend this conference if you weren't. But I am interested in finding out a little bit more about our audience. There we go. Is that synced? Awesome. I'd love to start with a question. And that question is, raise your hand if you use Google Apps, and specifically if you use either Slides, Docs, or Sheets, either in your personal or your workspace. Okay, great. Now, that's everybody. Jesus Christ. How many of you use it at work? Just raise your hand. Okay, that's almost everyone here again. All right. Well, then perhaps what I'll be doing today is in covering a little bit more about how those applications are having an impact already on your culture and what you can think about as you talk to your senior management about other technologies as you introduce them into your workplace. A lot of what I'm going to talk about comes from and has its basis in a wonderful TED Talk by a gentleman by the name of Steven Johnson. And Steven Johnson is fascinated by this idea of where do great ideas come from. And he has a wonderful 20-minute talk. If you have the time, write it down, take a picture of it, and do yourself a favor, spend 20 minutes watching it. And what we find when we listen to Steve Johnson is a few things. One is, it's really important to have these places where ideas go to have sex, right? What do we mean by that? Places where people can exchange ideas, can build off of one another, can innovate and iterate rapidly on a concept or an idea. The second thing he does is he debunks entirely the myth of Archimedes and the eureka moment in the bathtub when he goes running off in the streets naked. What he finds is the reality of great ideas does not happen in isolation. We tend to think of Rodin's The Thinker, right, as that's where the great inspiration and idea comes from. And what he actually finds is every great idea that he has tracked through time, including Darwin's theories, are largely built on the ideas of other and the interaction with those other parties and how those ideas build off of one another, and often in completely unrelated ways. And it's a wonderful TED Talk, but it's very important to how we think about culture, collaboration, innovation, and the benefits thereof. I would assert that in the next 5 to 10 years, the information you need to do your job will not only be at your fingertips, it'll be in your face. The ability to use artificial intelligence and machine learning in any organization will make it easy for information to be pushed to you as you need it, before you need it, and to be used by you without you having to invest the time and the effort. What's going to be critical in the next century is how we're able to tap into and collect information, analysis, and insight from what other people know. And that's truly at the heart of collaboration. I'm going to spend some time today talking a little bit about the head. How do we talk to our executives about collaboration and its impact on culture and its impact on our business results? Because ultimately, that's what your senior executives care about. I'm going to spend a lot less time on the heart because you're all here for a reason. You're passionate about culture and you're passionate about the benefits that a strong culture can bring. And we're going to talk a little bit about the feet, the behavior patterns that we're looking for in order to change and to drive change within an organization and a culture. I think many of you yesterday participated in the workshops. Do you mind just a quick show of hands? Who was at the workshops yesterday? I think we can boil down the benefits to business in really three fundamental areas. First, it's about speed. Speed of decision-making, speed of product development, speed of innovation, speed of responsiveness to your customers. The second key area is invention or innovation. How many ideas are we able to get forward? How quickly are we able to bring them to market? How effective are we in leading our organizations? And then the last is how we share information with each other, with our customers, with our suppliers, and with the larger network of individuals that make up our ecosystem, whatever that may be. We've done a study around the globe, and what we find is that organizations that collaborate are 2 times more likely to be more profitable than their competitors. More importantly, they're 2 times more likely to outgrow their competition. So if you're not in a collaborative organization and you're not collaborating every day, you're clearly missing a strategic advantage. More importantly, what's the benefit to the employee who collaborates? Right? 15% of them claim they're more efficient. They're 15% more efficient. Sorry, most of them would say they're more efficient. 15% more efficient. More important, the quality of their work improves. 73% of them believe that the output of the work that they are doing is vastly better with collaborative technologies and by working together in teams. They find they're more innovative. Better ideas get out on the table. Those ideas are built upon and acted upon more rapidly. And most importantly, they're happier. There's a stronger connection. They feel a shared sense of accomplishment. And ultimately, most of us want to feel connected in this world. That's ultimately what drives a lot of our satisfaction when you read all of the psychologist theory and all the rest. So what is collaboration? I'm going to paraphrase a famous quote from a judge in the Robert Mapplethorpe case. I can't describe collaboration, but I know it when I see it. And this is what it looks like, right? I mean, this is in the room. It's a democratic process. The stickies, everyone has a sticky. Everyone has a pen. You can put it on a piece of paper and on the wall. No idea is a bad idea. And then you start to distill and you work through it. So we all know what it looks like in a room. But what does it look like when you're not all in the same room? And what are some of those critical elements of collaboration? Clearly, there's the working together part of it. There's also something about tapping that collective intelligence, right? I have a perspective because I come from support. The salesperson has a perspective. The product development person has a perspective. When we combine all of those perspectives effectively and we get them out on the table and have a honest discussion around them, a challenging but respectful discussion, we are able to better tap into that collective knowledge. Collaboration often builds and iterates on ideas, right? We tend to see a really good idea and we're like, wow, oh yeah, we could do that and, right? I mean, all of you have done brainstorming. It's always and, right? It unlocks some unhidden potential, or some hidden potential, sorry. It obviously has a shared goal. Often when we're collaborating, we're working towards the same goal. If we're not, we should probably ask ourselves why we're collaborating. And then finally, it should create value, right? So as we look at the workplace, we've really seen 3 levers in changing the culture of an organization and in helping drive better collaboration. The culture and governance sounds obvious. It's things like the diversity, the workplace hierarchy. Are we a hierarchical organization? How do our managers think about their role as a manager? Are they facilitators, or are they telling us what to do? What are the incentives and rewards? Who gets promoted, and why do they get promoted? Is that rationale always clear to the organization? These are important elements. What do your leaders display and exhibit in terms of the values that they exhibit in their day-to-day interactions? There's clearly this idea of the workspace, and Stephen Johnson does a great job at describing the coffee shop in the 1600s, this place where people gathered to share ideas, all caffeinated, right? So wide awake, and that was relatively new in the time. But what do your breakout spaces look like? What's your workplace design look like? What are the meeting rooms? Where is the water cooler? You know, when I saw Stephen Johnson, it suddenly made sense to me why we give free food at Google. It's not because our founders say, ooh, free food, that's so great. No, it's because they fundamentally believe it's tied to a cultural value we have as well, where we try and interact and eat with a different person whenever we go to lunch. Don't go with the same group of people every time. Create a space for people to share these ideas and find other people in other parts of the organization and start sharing those ideas. Some of those best ideas have come about simply because we have free food. And then finally, what's the technology? Are we a phone-based company? Are we an email-based company? I would argue if you're an email-based company, it's asynchronous, and by its very nature, it doesn't build on ideas. It doesn't iterate very well, right? That was yesterday's email. I'm focused on tomorrow's problems, not yesterday's. So where do we find these places and these technologies that help us create a workplace where we can work together? I'd like to give a little story about Netflix. Who remembers Netflix's original business model, right? DVDs. Who had DVDs mailed to them like every other week, right? Or every week, or twice a week. It was a very brick and mortar business, right? And the organization, Reed Hastings clearly saw the writing on the wall and was like, man, while we're more efficient than Blockbuster and we've driven Blockbuster out of business and we've done it without any physical stores, this brick and mortar thing, it's gone. Do you guys realize that 90% of the internet traffic on a weekend in the United States is streaming video? Now again, we're not all working on the weekends, but it's an indication of how far they've come. So Reed Hastings' critical insight when he wanted to change the culture of the company, and he wanted to change the strategy of the company as well, was to try and use a catalyst to drive change. Workspace, they already had it. Go to their offices. It looks like any other Silicon Valley company, right? Open space, wonderful spaces, great food. Culture and governance. Hell, they wrote the book on culture and governance, right? You literally, Jonathan Rosenberg at Google, one of the early Google folks, will literally say, we stole shamelessly from the Netflix culture handbook, right? So they clearly had that. So Reed instead turned to technology. We need to move to the cloud. We're using all these products on a PC that aren't really connected. How do I get people to think differently about their business, and how do I get them to change the culture? And I think it's critical, if you want to change culture, you think about changing it on this parameter, on the technology parameter. It is not the only parameter, but it's a visible one that gets people to rethink their jobs every day. I'm not going to go through a lot of detail here, but I grew up in the world when there was this thing called an inter-office memorandum. Anyone written one? Right? Like you literally write an interoffice memorandum. It was typed up. I grew up on Wall Street, surprisingly, and you'd hand it off to your assistant, and your assistant would put a sticky on it and then write down all the names of the people that needed to review this interoffice memorandum. And then she would walk over to the first person on the list and put it in the inbox. Anyone remember that? It was a box. And that person would read the interoffice memorandum, write comments in the margin, and then they would, cross their name off of the sticky, right? And then they'd put it in their outbox, and their assistant would come, pick it up, and go to the next person on the list. 5 days later, you'd get the interoffice memorandum. 4 of the 5 people had sort of crossed off what they had done, and then you'd go back and you'd retype it based on the comments you got, right? Not very interactive, not a lot of interplay. 9 times out of 10, you were writing it to senior managers, so whatever they said, you put into the document, and then you recirculated it all over again, right, to make sure it was okay. Well, guess what? The workflow hasn't really changed that much with some of the tools that we're using. How many people, for those of you that are no longer using this application, how many versions do you remember having? Version 2.3.4? Alice. What did Alice have to say? Right? It really hasn't changed that much. What does it look like in the modern environment? It's real time. It's multiple people editing the same document at the same time. There's something going on here that's sort of hidden, and I want to unhide it for a little bit. And I want to tell a personal story around it. So I arrived at Google, and it was effectively a turnaround situation in our support organization. For many of you, I'm sure you're sitting there asking yourselves, Google provides support? Really? I've never been able to get to it. We do. We provide it to paying customers. And it was really a turnaround situation. We had a team that was underperforming. Attrition was going through the roof. People were unhappy. We were hiring Harvard, Stanford, and Dartmouth graduates, putting them on phones and telling them, go solve these customer problems. And it was clearly not a very fulfilling job. And when you're in a turnaround environment and you come from operations, particularly support is traditionally a command and control type of environment, right? If you don't answer the phone, people don't get help, you end up in this horrible, vicious cycle where queues keep backing up, customers are unhappy, people rush through each case because they need to get back to the queue. Long story short, it's not a good place to be. And the normal tendency of a turnaround manager, any of you ever heard of Chainsaw Al Dunlap, a famous turnaround manager in the 90s, is to come in and be dictatorial and quickly act and get things done. Well, that doesn't work at Google. And if you have an attrition problem already, I can promise you at Google, when you come in and say, this is what we're going to do and this is how we're going to do it, people leave. So, of course, I arrive. It's September. That's the annual planning process. And I really had to stop and reflect and say to myself, how am I going to turn this around? And immediately as I opened a doc, which is all we ever used, and I started putting my thoughts onto paper, I realized, wait a minute, I should just share this with the whole team and start getting the ideas onto this piece of paper for what we want to change and how we want to change it. And that process of opening it up and saying to folks, I don't have the answers. I hope you do. And if you don't, let's work together to figure this out, creates a number of things. Number one, there's a democracy of voice in a document. No one is louder unless they put it in caps or they bold it or they underline it, right? No one is more knowledgeable. Every idea is a good idea. You can comment easily and add additional color. You can have a dialogue even in the comments, and I've seen comments that are longer than the document at Google, right? The comment section you can read for 4 pages, the document's only 2, right? But that is the type of dialogue and the iteration and the ideas that are going on. And the other element is you're getting buy-in. Like, if my idea is on that sheet of paper, I now have a vested interest in making that happen. I have a sense of ownership over it. So again, this process of democratization, the sense that we're all equal, the sense that every voice has a place, are all critical elements to a culture of collaboration, a respectful dialogue that takes place. One of the funniest things that I found when I first got to Google was no one would change any of the words. Right? So someone would edit the document, but rather than edit the document, they would actually write tons of comments in the right section. May I suggest, open quote, close quote. It was a very respectful dialogue that took place. And it was much more efficient than the old interoffice memorandum. There's really 4 critical elements to workplace collaboration today. It's, how do we create together? How do we innovate and ideate? How do we generate new material and ideas? How do we meet and connect? And how do we do it in real time? And how do we do it anywhere, anytime, any device? Right? Sometimes I'm on my cell phone and I want to be able to not only talk to you, but I also want to see what you're seeing. Right? And it's pretty critical that we be able to do that in today's world where, quite honestly, flexibility is a critical element of the cultures that we want to create. How do I share ideas and collect feedback from multiple parties? And how do I iterate on those ideas? And then obviously, how do I make it easy to access all that information from anywhere, anytime, any device? What you're actually seeing in the graphic that's moving there is just my team. From 2010, when we launched Drive and all the editors within Google and forced everyone to use them exclusively, through 2014. And you can begin to see the connections that are starting to occur within the Drive on sheets and slides and docs, and how quickly those connections get created. This is what collaboration looks like in a diagram, right? So, where do we go from here? How do I get started? Right? First of all, you've got to start with the strategy, right? How do I tie our strategy to the culture we're trying to drive and the collaboration we're trying to drive? Second, you got to revisit the technology. You got to ask yourselves, are we taking full advantage of the social nature of the products that we're using, the technologies we're using, of the ability to collaborate within those technologies? Third, got to ask yourselves, what are the incentives? Who gets promoted? Why do they get promoted? At Google, I do not make a promotion, and I do not allow a promotion based solely on what you did. You also have to be strong at how you did it. The end does not justify the means in the Google promotion process. You could have blown all of your objectives and key results out of the water. But if you did it in a disrespectful way, by burning bridges with other people, you do not get promoted at Google. Plain and simple. It is the what and the how. That's a performance metric that everyone knows and everyone respects and behaves towards. And if you can't moderate your behavior that way, you know that your career prospects at Google are limited. And if you can't do it over successive quarters, you know that the exit door is the best career path for you. So again, what are those incentives? Right? And then how do I actually go through the change management process? What do I want to drive? And most importantly, how do I begin to measure it? Right? This is a media company. They did it before and after, and they continue to measure how employees are feeling about collaboration within their organization. 92% felt that it positively impacted their work. 35% felt more productive. 49% felt that collaboration allowed them more flexibility. 3.1 hours saved per week. Right, these are real results, and these are also, we've checked back on this company recently, and these have all improved actually. And 36% feel as though their work is more innovative. Okay, maybe you're not a technology company. This is business results that the business cared about, and I'll tell you what company this is in a minute. It is definitely not a technology company. I think it is definitely 100 years old. If I go back to Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tales, I'm pretty sure this job was in those tales. 33% more time spent with customers. 50% reduction in their field management costs. They have people going out on site all the time. That's 80% of their business. A 60% reduction in their travel costs all through the use of these collaborative tools. And all of this while increasing customer satisfaction. What is the business? Extermination. Right? The Pied Piper. This is a page from their annual report. They're a European company, and here they're specifically referring to the impact that collaboration has, and they're really focusing on 3 primary areas. One, they use our social media app to share ideas. So you've got people, literally the rat exterminators, talking about the best place to put a trap, showing that picture, sending it out on Google+, posting it to their peers, and talking about these ideas that they have to make rat catching or bug extermination more efficient and faster. Video calling. A lot of times there's technicians in the field, there's a problem. They're actually starting to get to things like wired Internet of Things rat traps, so you know when the trap is full, right? But there are problems that occur out in the field, and they sometimes need an expert. And so they go there with the video, on their phone, by the way, and they take a video of what's going on in a Hangout in real time and share it with someone back at the main office to try and discover what went wrong. What were the environmentals? What were the issues that caused this not to work, this technology? And then finally, the apps for productivity. And they really do credit themselves to having moved their business into what they would describe as the internet age as a result of the collaborative tools that they use. So with that, I'd love to open it up to some questions. Yes. Sorry, someone's going to come around with a mic, so if you can just hold on one second, Gary.
Thank you. So I have a question about collaboration at Google in terms of predictive people analytics and the study that you all did on, looking at what are the major factors that really predict success on teams. And if I recall the New York Times article, one of them had to do with candor and empathy, and I think another one was meaningful experiences. Can you flesh that out a little bit?
Sure. So I'm not going to remember. So first of all, he's referring to a New York Times article where our People Ops team, who somehow managed to combine HR with data and statistics, not often the purview of HR, and to do really deep analysis into what are the elements of strong performing teams and how do they contrast to the elements of weak performing teams. And they literally were banging their heads against the wall for almost 2 years straight, trying to understand what are the variables that make a team successful. And they could not uncover a set of data that was predictive around what that was until they hit upon one simple idea. And that simple idea, we got to think of it as a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And the basic core foundation for successful teams was called psychological safety. And it got to this idea of candor and empathy and some of these other things that you're talking about. What is psychological safety? It is literally you feel as though the people in that room care about you. They care about what you have to say. They have a vested interest in your success. And you feel safe in that environment. You feel as though you can speak your mind openly. Successful teams, almost all the successful teams, start with a foundation of psychological safety. And it's really a critical element. It's very important to understand how this comes about. So how does this come about? It comes about often by managers talking about a very deep personal and emotional experience. That's the easiest way to start creating psychological safety. And to tie that in some way to the behavior patterns that they have today, or the belief systems that they have, or the value system that they have, and an open encouragement of sharing some of those personal experiences. almost no one-on-one I have starts with the task list. It always starts with, how are your kids? How was the vacation? How is X, Y, and Z going in your house? Because I know that this was a problem last week, right? And we start from that place of psychological safety because we know that people who feel safe and secure in their jobs do better work. It's simple. When you're stressed, you don't think as well. You get the amygdala hijack, right? I'm not going to get all the rest of these right. I'm happy to share with all of you the article. It didn't quite get to the essence of this. I'll see if I can find a better article to share with this audience. I'll get it through Vanessa. But these 5 layers are pretty critical. Yes.
Freakonomics has a great podcast on this that got to that and other elements. So if you Google Freakonomics, Google work, it's fantastic, I think. I didn't read the article. So my question is just a little bit more about what you do. So do you guys also consult? So it sounds like support, I think of as sort of reactive, maybe falsely, but I'm just understanding, because it sounds like you have some fantastic data from your clients. So I'm just wondering about a little bit more about what your organization does.
Yeah, so there's multiple parts of the organization. Most of my organization is largely focused on break-fix support and what I call customer onboarding and early experience for the long-tail customers. So these are customers up to 100 seats. We have teams that work closely with partners to come in and help talk about transformation and change. One of the things that we now do when we launch Google Apps into a large corporate environment or even to a medium-sized corporate environment is we do something called transformation labs. And we consciously walk in and we take these cross-functional teams and we put them as cross-functional teams into a large room. We have tables of 6 to 10 people at a table, and we literally start to say, okay, now with these tools, let's start, we go through 3 phases. We inspire them and get them really motivated and excited. Then we ask them to ideate and to try and come up with, what are the problems you guys are having in your day-to-day jobs? What are the issues that you're facing? What are the things that are inefficient? What are the things that are making you unhappy in the work that you're doing every day? And then we ask them to begin taking those ideas and those problem areas, and we actually start telling them, go prototype it. Rethink that process and actually go prototype it using Google Apps, using all of the capabilities you have there. And what we find is when we do this with organizations, people start to think about their work differently. They start asking themselves, now that I have a new technology that does different things, how might I change the business process? And it does 2 things. One, it produces business value for the business, which is critical to us. But the second piece is it starts to drive active engagement. It starts to get people involved with the product. And so we have partners that can help run transformation labs for you. You can find a whole host of partners. There are companies like Accenture, was formerly Cloud Sherpas, Onyx, a whole host of companies that do these things. We've worked with them closely to develop these capabilities. They can come in and run transformation labs for you. We don't have enough resources within Google to do it for everybody, but our partners do provide these services and capabilities to those of you who are interested in asking, are we getting the full value out of Google Apps? We even do this with companies that have been on Google Apps for 4 or 5 years. And while the problem sets are more challenging, what we often find is in those environments, a small amount of coding on something like Google App Engine or some other cloud-based provider for some middleware layers can get done very quickly, and some of the business processes can be transformed much more rapidly, even in an environment where we've been 4 or 5 years and that are very collaborative and working together very well. So, any other questions? Yes.
Thank you. Honored to have your microphone. So, you mentioned a little bit about the practices that you have around customer onboarding and the value that it will provide. My question is more around internal focus to your group and is more reflective. And what I want to ask you is, early on in your talk, you mentioned about how you have Harvard graduates, Stanford graduates putting in a support role, and you had to make some changes there. When it comes to your, say, recruiting practices, do you actively say to yourselves, okay, now we have reached a point where we have way too many Ivy Leaguers and no intellectual representative from any other group? And do you have a commitment to disrupt yourself and say, hey, you little start-uppers over there, you come here and you give us some ideas, you participate in this ecosystem?
So first of all, a lot has changed at Google in terms of our hiring practices. I will say you do not need to be an Ivy Leaguer. In fact, when People Ops did the analysis, what they found was that the top tier universities, though helpful predictors, were not always the best predictors of success, both at Google and beyond Google. And so we have refined our analysis. For those of you that have work experience but didn't attend one of these over-the-top expensive and crazy schools, believe me, if you're smart, you're collaborative, you're innovative, you work well with others, you follow the rules of everything I ever needed to know I learned in kindergarten, right? Honestly, there's a place for you at Google. It's not based solely today on your academic pedigree, because we found that the academic pedigree, though helpful, is not a predictor. Did I answer your question? And certainly, I've had to evolve our hiring strategies. More importantly, I've had to change the nature of the work we do within Google support. I've had to create an environment where people feel as though they can innovate, where they feel as though they can make changes and have an impact, because those are also part of the hierarchical needs that I was describing before, that people feel they can have an impact in the work that they do. And we've had to really change the job description for what the Googlers do, and we've done it largely by outsourcing a lot of the rote and repetitive work. And then we've taken those same group of people that used to do that rote, repetitive work, changed their job functions, turned them into program managers, turned them into more technical specialists. They're now developing tools, they're developing capabilities, and the rest. Yes?
So I hear that Google has an emotional intelligence program. So I want to know what is the impact that that type of programming has in the culture from your experience?
So an emotional intelligence program, I would say first and foremost, we hire for emotional intelligence. We try and develop it in people, and each of us as managers have responsibilities to do that. And how we do that is largely described in another New York Times article called The 8 Behaviors of Successful Managers. And again, it was People Ops who did this analysis of what makes a successful people manager. So number one, emotional intelligence is hired for it. We really focus quite a bit of our time in the interviewing on something called googliness, right? And it is this, it looks a lot like the slide of collaborative that I showed you before with all those keywords, but we really hire for that. And that in and of itself, and our leadership is another key element that we look at. And within leadership, there's a lot about the way that you think about interacting with people, the respect you show others, your ability to respectfully challenge ideas and assumptions, not people, ideas and assumptions. And we have a lot of training around how I, as a manager, or any of my managers, can help coach people to better outcomes using or move them along the emotional intelligence curve. And I can tell you, I've had a lot of people who are off the charts brilliant, but had a lot of difficulty on the emotional intelligence. And you can change emotional intelligence. It takes time and dedication, and you have to be willing to invest in it. But using some of these, what we call oxygen attributes, which were described in another New York Times article, you can actually start to shape that behavior. And if you can't, it's probably better that you guys separate your ways, if that makes sense. I think I have time for one more question. If we can get a mic down here. Thanks.
I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about, or if you have any insights in terms of how the use of these collaboration tools and culture of collaboration plays out for a distributed team versus a co-located team.
So the whole goal of our tools is to make the co-location need go away, right? So at the beginning of August, or the end of July, I ran a 3.5-day workshop where we were looking at our sales process and trying to why was I doing the sales process? I don't know. But anyway, we were redesigning the sales process, and we invited team members from around the globe. We wanted representation from sales team in Europe, the US, and in Japan. We wanted representation from sales operations folks from around the globe. We wanted representation from our deal desk team. We wanted representation from our legal team. Clearly, getting all these people in the same room was a challenge. So what did we do instead? We used Hangouts, and we used our collaborative tools to connect some of these people. And thank God the folks in London decided to stay until 1 o'clock in the morning to work with us on this. But you have to create what I call interrupts. So when we do something like that, 20 people in the room, 7 or 8 people on the Hangout, or as we call it, the GVC, you can see them physically. They're there. They can see what you're looking at if it's materials, but if it's a whiteboard, it's harder. So what do? We have someone turn on their cell phone and go up to the whiteboard and show the ideas being developed and tell the team on the Hangout, hey, go click on this person because you'll start to see what's on the board and you'll be able to participate there. The second thing we do is we appoint someone. Hey, you own London, right? They chat you interrupt, you bring us that idea or that thought, or we'll open it up to them, right? So you appoint roles in the room to account for each of the people that are participating virtually. So you've got to find this balance between these two capabilities of all being present and that beautiful picture of Stickums, which is what we were doing in the room, and people who couldn't participate but had an active voice, which we wanted to hear. So how do you create those interrupts? How do you think about those things? I would not recommend doing it that way. Either everyone should be in the room for the 3.5 days, or everyone should be remote, right? And then how do you do that, and how do you facilitate that? The tools, we're trying as hard as we can to apply the principles of what works in a room when we're all together to the tools and how you use them and how you collaborate with them. So did I answer your question? Yeah. But it is important to also change the behavior patterns within the room, right? So the question is, are there different results for distributed teams versus those that are closer together? The Rentokil example that I gave you, right? These are people in the field. We have seen where the one-to-one interaction is critical. We have seen absolutely no difference between co-located teams and those that are remote. And in fact, it's often improved because now you can see what I see, and I'm on site and I'm looking at something. The elevator's broken. Why is it broken? I don't know. I'm looking at the whole control board. Can you see what's wrong with the control board? I can't see it. Let me get a tech expert in the office, or let's bring him into the call, right? And so those sorts of things are facilitated much more easily. When you talk about large group interactions, I will tell you that you have a lot more time to do more interactions with more people because you're not on an airplane. Like, I have a globally distributed team. We run 7x24, right? And I have offices in 8 cities with more than 20 employees in each of those 8 cities. And if I'm on the road meeting with all of those teams all the time, or if we all have to get together all the time, it's never going to work, right? So we're constantly using Hangouts and meetings to get together and to talk through what is our strategy, what are we trying to do, or to brainstorm and to solve a problem, right? How do we provide better support to this set of customers? What do we need to change in the processes and the capabilities? And then we also invite our vendor partners to come in and to help us with that. Did I answer your question? Thank you all very much for the time, and I'm looking forward to the next speaker.